Welcome to Tree Talking Time, where we talk all things tree dogs, from the smallest feists to the largest hounds, treating squirrels to bears and everything in between. And from time to time, we might even run a little fast game.
I got my first tree dog in high school. Her name was Belle. She was a Ladner Blackmouth Cur, and I found out about Blackmouth Curs because we bought some goats from a guy who had some, and I'd never heard of them before. And I said, "What do they do?" And said, "Oh, I hunt squirrels and coons with them." And I'd never heard of people doing that with the dog. I grew up in an area with lots of coon hounds and things, but hadn't heard of a cur dog, hadn't heard of hunting squirrels with curs. And that got me really interested and started doing research and found Mr. Ladner and bought a pup from him via mail back when we used to use that, and sent my letter down and sent him a deposit. And him and Mr. Kurt sent me up a puppy, a little girl, and she was awesome. And you know, every dog gets better with time as you think back and forget about all the mistakes. But yep. she was great. She was a little bit of a slow starter, and I had to hunt her for a good season and a half before she finally started treeing squirrels. But the thing that always sticks out to me is that she was just a natural coon dog. Her would have been her third season. I finally decided to switch her on the coons, and I'd never run her at night, never exposed her to one in a cage, anything like that. But I had frozen a coon skin from some guys who were helping me get started. I drug it out in the yard, and she treed it and got all excited on that scent. And I thought, oh, well, she's got a good idea of what's going on now. And I took her out that night, opening night of coon season in Virginia, and she goes out next to a river close to our house, and she starts getting, kind of gamey under this tree. And I'm like, oh, man, no way she's going to tree a coon the first night we're out here. And darn if I don't look up, and there's a coon, and she starts treeing a few seconds later. And we shoot it out, and it's still a little bit kicked in, and she goes, and she grabs it. And I mean, she just took to it so easy. And we had a whole lot of fun in high school, did a lot of hunting with her, and she was an awesome dog. So that's how I got started getting into the tree dog game.
How long ago was that?
Oh gosh, that would have been, I bought her in 05 or 06.
Okay.
Somewhere in there. And she just passed away winter of 2021. I had sold her to a buddy when I went to college who had more time to hunt than I did. Mm-hmm. And he hunted with her for many years after I sold her. And she was still treeing coons when she was 13, 14. Wow. And treed squirrels the day she was euthanized. He took her out for one last hunt. So she was a great dog.
That's incredible.
She was.
Now, you said you sold her when you went to college. I would imagine college consumed a lot of time for you.
Too much time. Yeah. So
we're gonna. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Dr. Taylor Young. I've labeled myself Tree Dog Doc on social media and some full cry articles. Mm-hmm. I live in Central Virginia in practice in Bedford County. I grew up just west of there in Roanoke and in Rocky Mount area of Virginia, and I now live in Amherst County, but work in Bedford County. And I'm a mixed animal veterinarian there. I see dogs, cats, and also see large animals like horses, cattle, and other farm animals. Mm-hmm. And so that's a little bit about me.
It's a nice variety. At least you're not stuck with one or the other all day.
That's right. Variety is a spice of life. That's my motto. So
definitely.
It's a great job.
So we're going to kind of talk about some stuff pertaining to veterinary medicine today, because you're an expert, obviously.
Well, some people call me that. They gave me the degree, and I passed the board exam. So I guess here I am.
Definitely smarter than most of us hillbillies out here who keep a bunch of dogs.
Well, there's different kinds of intelligence, and I believe that. You guys could school me on a lot of things, but hopefully I can help spread some of the things that I've learned and paid a lot of money for the education. So I have to hope that I can help improve the lives and health of some of your dogs and things that you're doing too.
No, and I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed the articles. Like I was just telling you, I read your most recent article, and actually I learned something out of it today. Little tidbit of information that you'd put in there was about fleas carrying tapeworms. I had never heard that. Yeah,
sure enough. All they got to do is eat them, and then when they get digested, that's when the tapeworm eggs get released, and that's how they get it. So anytime I have a guy tell me that the dog doesn't have fleas, and then we find tapeworm eggs in the fecal, then I say, well, there's been some fleas on there at some point, and
Yeah.
here's why. So yeah, sure enough.
Interesting.
Well, good. I'm glad you're reading it and learning things.
No, I've really enjoyed them. How long have you been writing those now?
Well, I just got started with them this spring.
Okay.
I've always wanted to, and kind of had would read gun dog articles, gun dog magazine, and see the doctors writing in there, and I always thought, oh man, I'd love to do that one day. And so, of course, with my interest being in tree dogs and specifically these cur dogs, I always wanted to one day be able to do it for full Cry. And finally got started with it this spring. Got a little downtime to start doing it, so I've enjoyed doing it for sure.
Okay, so then I didn't miss any because my full Cry subscription sometimes lapses because I forget to renew it, and so I just wasn't sure if I had missed any or not. But I guess I've probably read them all then. You just started.
Yeah, you're up to date. I started with a preventative health article and went from there. So
yes, I did read that one.
Good deal.
Do you have tree dogs now, or?
I do. I've got another Ladner. I
Okay.
went back to the same well. I was happy with what I had before, and Rip is his name, and he just turned 1 in May. I got him shipped up here last September, and he's a pretty thing, and he's out of some dogs that they told me was out of their best tree dog lines, and so I've had him in the woods about every chance I could get during season, and he's coming along. He's a little bit of a slow start too. He took a while to start kind of getting out and hunting and getting out from under my feet. But if one thing I've learned from being a vet and from doing all the school and stuff, it's patience. And so just kept him in the woods, and he's finally getting out there. He's just about treeing. I think once we get a few squirrels knocked out to him, when kill season opens back up, we're going to be there.
Awesome.
And then we'll start getting after some coons too. But yeah, so I got Rip. He's that 1-year-old Ladner.
Nice. We talked a little bit before this episode, and you came up with a really good list. I mean, so I'll just let you take this away. I mean, I'll let you. Usually I run the show, but I'm gonna turn the reins over to you and let you run this show because I don't know anything.
Well, if there's one thing I do know, and I want to say up front, is that I believe that the guys that have hounds and curs and fights, they are very, very invested. You spend a lot of time with these dogs. I know because I do it. It takes a lot of work and effort, and I see a lot of health questions pop up on Facebook and social media and forums and things like that. And what I can always see is that there's always the desire to do what's best for our dogs. Mm-hmm. And man, people pick up and they do learn a lot of good stuff from getting good advice from, whether that's from mentors that bring them up in the hunting community, seeking out medical advice from people who've been doing it for a long time. So you guys do know a lot and have learned a lot of good things. And that's why you're always my favorite client to come in, because usually I don't have to explain things in terrible minute detail because you've already got the gist. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that have changed in veterinary medicine. It's advanced. I mean, just really fast. And they tell us when we start school, by the time we graduate, we're already going to be out of date. Things are changing that fast. Mm-hmm. And so, my hope is to just bring some of that newer stuff and also just kind of give you some insight into what the vet world looks like from our perspective, mm-hmm. and kind of help you understand why sometimes your vet has to do the things they do.
Yeah.
Or not do the things they used to be able to do in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So,
because you hear that a lot. You hear, oh, I miss old Doc so-and-so because they were just a good old down-home vet and they would, do X, Y, and Z, and the new vet in town doesn't do that.
Yep. I hear that a lot.
I was going to say, you hear that a lot in the houndsman community.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I guess that's a good place to start and give you some insight into that. 20, 30 years ago, I'd say vet med was primarily veterinarians who saw a little bit of everything, and if they didn't see it, they were just small animal exclusive. They were usually your in stop. You aren't going to see a specialist. It was either do or die with that guy, and so they had to make something work. And big part of vet med is it's not just the animal. You got to treat the client, we call it. And so, things that were done to try to at least get some progress or to make the problem go away. And those aren't all bad things. But now we've totally transitioned to it's a new world. The vet that sees mixed animals is dying out, like I do, and it's not a common thing anymore unless you're in a really rural area.
Yep.
We're increasingly seeing most of my classmates, I would say probably over 80% of them, go into exclusive small animal practice.
Mm-hmm.
Most of those are corporately owned, meaning these are big companies that own multiple hospitals spread throughout multiple states, cities.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Didn't realize
that's changing very, very rapidly changing. Yeah. And there's still plenty of independently owned practices, but I would say a lot of my generation is going into corporately owned practices. And then, you're having other people that do just food animals, just do horses, just do, and now we have a ton of increasing specialization. People who just do reproduction, people who just do surgery, people who just do cardiology, heart. So
insane.
there's an increasing, it is, right? Yeah. People, when I say that there's a neurologist to go see for your dog, they're like, what?
Yeah.
Somebody can cut open a dog brain? Yeah, they do. So the old doctor that used to do it all is really there. That's not going to happen anymore, because with that increasing specialization comes, there's just so many things you can learn in 4 years of vet school, and there's an increased reliance in our education of getting to a point where you've run out of your knowledge, and now you need to refer. And increase emphasis on, get to a point where you've done everything you can, and then refer to a specialist who can handle that further.
Mm-hmm.
And that has its pros and cons, but that right there is just changing how your vet is educated.
Oh yeah.
That you're seeing now versus how they used to be educated 20 years ago.
Definitely.
So that's changed the game big time.
And at the same point, the way animals are viewed in today's society overall versus the way animals were viewed, like you said, 20, 30, 50 years ago, is drastically different.
That's exactly right.
Which is what has driven a lot of that change, I'm sure. 50 years ago, nobody was going to take their dog to a neurologist.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So.
And now, I get surprised by the number of people that will do it. So, yeah, you're exactly right. I just say that there's definitely some pros and cons to that attitude and that outlook. And I would say that most people come in and they call them their fur babies, or they're like my kids, is a phrase I hear all the time.
Yep.
And being a little bit of a farm boy, mixed animal vet, I see cows, and sometimes we're making economic decisions, not emotional decisions. And there's in being a Christian and having a biblical perspective on where animals fall, and they're not people, they're not made in the image of God, and with the importance of people. That's not a perspective that is common anymore. I can tell you it's very limited in, just from my colleagues and classmates.
Yeah.
And most people do see them as a person, which also affects how we are allowed to work and prescribe and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. You had said a lot of the tree dog people have a general knowledge of shots and deworming and some flea and tick stuff, but some of that might be outdated, and some of the sources that we go to might not always necessarily be the best. I know we were talking a little bit about how to assess your source when it comes to medical advice.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's the thing we get taught in veterinary school, and this is true for human med too, is practicing evidence-based medicine, or EBM is the abbreviation. And what that means is we want to practice medicine that has good evidence behind it. And what does good evidence actually mean? Well, there's this whole pyramid that you can look up, EBM pyramid, that kind of rates how good a piece of information is. And we don't have to get too technical, but all medical advice is not equal. And so we have all the way down to, kind of your lowest level of quality would be what we call anecdotal evidence, which means here's what I've experienced and seen, so I'm going to make recommendations based off of that. And that's primarily what we see when we're looking on, the Facebook Hound group or the Old Squirrel Dog forums. Is this is somebody who's, hey, here's what happened in my dog, and here's how I treat it. Here's how you can do so. And that has a lot of validity to it. We do that. Vets do that every day. We make medical decisions based on prior experiences. And so that's not necessarily wrong. However, if all you do is rely on that, just your own experiences and the times that you've experienced this problem, you're really selling yourself and your dog short, because there's a huge body of knowledge and research and literature out there to try to tell you what the best way to do things is based on more objective criteria and input.
Mm-hmm.
So, these recommendations that I make when somebody walks in and they want to ask what shots we get or what preventative should I use. These are things based off of either national guidelines from national organizations and national bodies of veterinarians, published research that shows this drug or that drug is more efficacious in this disease scenario, trials to show that this drug does the job versus not using the drug.
Yeah.
So it's important that those recommendations have something backing them up. And, like I say, you don't have good quality evidence for every possible scenario. And whenever somebody comes in to me and I'll say, you know what, I actually don't have a great reason for saying this, but it's just based on my experience. I don't have research to back it up. I can't point you to a study, but here's what I've done in the past.
Yeah.
But I try to acknowledge that versus the times when I can confidently say, hey, here's what a paper shows. This is the best way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And like we've said, there's been a lot of money and time invested into this research in the last 20 years, where previously it wasn't. So there's been a lot of advances in the last 20. I'm saying 20 is an arbitrary number, but I would kind of say that's probably been where a lot of it's happened, where a lot of leaps and bounds have been made.
Sure. Yeah, and a lot of that's driven by technology and the internet boom and having that easier access to information.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. And two, and there's I think there's a general, I guess I would say, an attitude sometimes of mistrust between some especially vets towards country guys, hound dog guys, tree dog guys. They get viewed sometimes as not doing what they think is best for the dog and vilified. And I've heard comments made multiple times from my colleagues and about guys that have hounds and stuff. And likewise, there's kind of an attitude of I guess animosity sometimes from the tree dog world towards veterinarians being money grubbing, being just in it to only wanting to treat fluffy and foo-foo little poodles and having expensive pills that are just for them.
Mm-hmm.
But when you come in to me, my recommendations are the same whether or not it's your bear dog or whether or not it's the little Shih Tzu that Grandma brought in, and because there's evidence that's applicable to all of them. Now, how we go about some things is different, but the research is the same. And the reason I'm saying that is, I hope that we can hopefully in this podcast too, let's get behind the curtain of why we make those recommendations and talk about those things, and have a little bit more trust in your vet.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to this where we get these things. I don't get kickbacks for recommending this drug or that drug. Sure, we have a little bit of a markup, but that's any business does that on a product.
Yeah.
So we don't make these recommendations and do these things based off of any hidden agenda. It's because that's what we've been trained and educated to do and have good evidence that this is what works and what's going to be effective.
Are you sure? I know Joe down the road, he told me that vet, was getting paid by that drug company, Are you sure?
If you could have him let me know where he gets that check from, I'd like to sign up for it.
Exactly.
Sure. Because, with that too, I guess this is a good place to talk about it. But, what it takes to become a vet and the cost that it does, this is maybe a good place to talk about the cost of medicine, because that's closely associated with the advance of our medical knowledge. Educational cost in general has risen dramatically compared to what it used to be, right? I mean, pretty much any young guy listening to this podcast that went to college can probably tell you, that they've still got school debt, unless you were smart and went to a trade, unlike me. But we so and in the vet community, especially, is one of the harder hit areas because you have to have a 4-year undergrad degree, and most people are financing that with student loans. Then after you finish your 4 years of undergrad, you've got to do 4 years of veterinary school. And depending on where you go, if you're in an in-state school like I went, it's much cheaper than if you have to go out of state. But we're looking at an average. I think the last numbers I saw is that the average veterinary student is graduating with $140,000 to $150,000 in debt. And yeah, and that number is skewed because there's a lot of veterinary students that are graduating with no debt because they're fortunate enough to have family help or inheritance or whatever that pays for that. Or they're on the opposite end of the spectrum. I have multiple friends who have over $300,000 in debt.
Wow!
Just the day that they graduate, based off of their undergrad and their veterinary school loans. And veterinary school is so competitive, some people will go and get a master's degree or something in between there to get an edge to get in. So you're racking up all this money before you've ever earned a dollar off of it. And with that means that we're having to graduate and take jobs that pay better to help pay that debt.
Yep.
And so, along with that, that's another goes back to the not having the old doctor out in the country anymore. Frankly, most of my classmates couldn't afford to. They can't make enough income to justify their student loan payment that they have to make in addition to all your other living expenses.
Yeah. Which would
so
make sense why the corporate vets are kind of becoming a bigger thing. If they can supply the paycheck that most young vets are going to need, that's why that's taking away of the old style vet that had a single guy with a practice.
Exactly.
And even all the cost of owning a practice.
Yeah, exactly. And if you come out and you're trying to apply for a business loan, so much educational debt, that's a much harder thing. And so it's a significant hurdle for today's graduating veterinarian to get over. And with that, part of the reason that cost is increasing for us is because we're getting education increasingly from specialists and people that are could have gone and made a lot of money in private practice, and they're having to get paid to come back to academia. But we're also having to pay increased costs because of the increased technology that we're having to learn on. We had an MRI and a CT machine at my veterinary school. We're talking human level stuff, which is routine for them. But 20 years ago would have been unheard of to have your dog go through an MRI. But who pays for those things? The veterinary student does help subsidize those things. But that also then downstream increases your cost of care because there's a lot of new things hitting the market, and because we have access to these new technologies and information, the new drugs that hit the market. We'll talk about flea and tick pills in a little bit. They're awesome. They're very effective, but I do understand they're expensive. And so just our greater access to those things and the increased specialization of these drugs and equipment that we have does drive up that cost in addition to the cost of having what it takes to actually just live a lifestyle of it. For sure.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, you've got a lot of things that are driving up the cost of veterinary medicine. And like we said, the way people view animals in general anymore. As houndsmen, we kind of, I don't want to say that we view animals less, but I think we're more realistic with that they are animals and they're not children. And so therefore we struggle because I put myself in this category. At times I've struggled with the cost of vet care, and it's like, that's ridiculous. It's a dog. But when you break it down like that and you say increased education costs, increased technology, increased research and development that is going into veterinary medicine as a whole, that's just driving all of these costs upward together. It's not just a single, this drug costs more because it costs a lot to make it. It's everything across the board.
Sure.
And it makes a lot of sense when you actually kind of spell it out like that. And it's really not hard when you think about it, but most people, including myself, don't really think about it.
Yep.
I see why those costs are already up.
Absolutely. And, just any guy that is listening to this that owns a business, gets that. I do see a difference between the people that walk into my office that run and operate their own business versus are an employee.
Mm-hmm.
We've got overhead, and we've got
Yep.
staff that I've got to pay whether you show up for your appointment or not.
Mm-hmm.
Equipment that's sitting there whether it gets used that day or not, and so all that adds to it. And so that $50 walking in the door is nowhere near paying for all our costs just to be open that day.
Mm-hmm.
And but I do get it too, because I was a consumer. I was a patient and a client before I was a vet.
Yeah.
And you see those costs, and before you understand what goes on behind the curtain, you're like, man, that hurts my wallet. And I get it.
Yep.
I get it. I do.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. So I know that I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure others are. I'm always not maintaining the best relationship with a vet, and not taking our dogs to the vet regularly, and only doing it when we need to. So why don't we talk about why we should maintain that relationship and what's the benefits of it?
Yeah. So along with the changes in how many vets are coming out with so much more debt and increased costs, the other thing that's happening is they're calling it a vet shortage.
Mm-hmm.
Nationwide, and what's really happening is there's an increased amount of patients. More people are, especially our generation, are graduating college, and they're either not getting married or they're deciding kids are off the table for them, and their pets are becoming their kids, and so there's more pets.
Mm-hmm.
There's more people that have more pets per person, and then you also have this giant backlog of there's all these people who want to be a vet, but there's this bottleneck called vet school.
Yeah.
And we're not able to just crank out a bunch of new vets just because we have an increased demand. And so right now, especially there's some sectors of veterinary that are hit really hard, like equine medicine especially. It's getting harder and harder to find a horse vet, but it's also starting to affect small animals too.
Okay.
And so it used to be a lot easier to get in to see a vet when you got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hey, my dog, I woke up this morning and he's limping. Can I bring him in? Can you take a look at him? Or, man, my dog's been itching and biting at his nether regions all night long. Can I come in and get a pill? Well, quite frankly, there's many days where we just have to say no because we can't handle any more patients. Mm-hmm. and do a good job. And so with that, we have to have priority given towards people that we have already established. And I'll define what this is. It's called a veterinary client-patient relationship, or VCPR. And so, in Virginia, for example, a VCPR is defined as having a relationship where me as your veterinarian or another vet in the practice has basically said, I am going to be your veterinarian. I've assumed responsibility for making judgments about your animal. I know what's going on with your animal via a diagnosis made by examination or having talked with you. And we've maintained that relationship closely enough that I feel like I have a good general knowledge of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And some practices, practice acts, depending on the state, might have a time frame on that. Virginia does not, but we basically cut it off at a year and say if we haven't seen your dog for an exam in the last year, our VCPR is no longer valid.
Okay.
And where that becomes important is these situations like, hey, my dog, I took him hunting last night. I woke up and he's limping on his foot. Can you see him? Well, if we don't have a valid VCPR and we've got 20 people calling in the morning saying they want to come in and get an exam, priority is given towards people who have already established a VCPR with us. Okay. And have that established. Now, we can debate on whether that's fair or wrong or not, but at the end of the day, I only have so many hours in a day and can only see so many patients.
Yeah.
And I have assumed responsibility, having established that VCPR with you. What part of that was I've assumed responsibility for your dog's medical issues. And so that patient who I've assumed responsibility for takes priority over the patient that I haven't seen in 3 years.
Yeah.
So that is a big part, especially for our hounds and cur dogs. You are liable to have an accident or a wound, mm-hmm. or they get into eating something. Oh, and if you have that VCPR established, I can do a lot more than if I haven't seen your dog in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
For example, that dog that you went hunting last night, he came in limping the next morning, and I did his annual exam, 6 months ago. Well, you know what? I can probably just tell you, hey, I'm slammed today. I cannot see another patient, but you can come in and I can give you some pain. And you can give that to him for a couple of days, and let's see how he's doing till I can squeeze in and come take a look at him.
Yeah.
If we don't have a valid VCPR, I legally cannot prescribe those drugs for your dog, because I will be seen as giving prescription to a dog that I don't have enough medical knowledge to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And that threatens my license to practice. As a matter of fact, a vet here locally within the last few years lost his license because he was giving vaccines to dogs that he had not done exams on. And he got taken to the board over it and lost his ability to practice. And so we have to be really careful about what we can do and not do now.
Mm-hmm.
And having that VCPR gets you a long ways in order to be able to do those things.
I never realized it was that important.
Yeah. And that's especially we're, also under increasing legal scrutiny, I guess you could say, where we are much higher risk of being sued or having, a malpractice complaint made against us.
Yeah.
And that's made the profession as a whole practice a little bit more on the defensive than we used to. And that goes back again to your old country doctor. He didn't have that pressure back in his day where somebody was going to sue him over his quote unquote kid that you treated and they claim you messed up.
Yep.
That's a different world now, and that does affect too how we prescribe and treat, because we have to be able to defend ourselves if we get taken in front of the state board. And so as having that VCPR established, knowing what's going on with your dog, being able to prescribe appropriately or treat appropriately, that all goes into play there.
Interesting. So I'm learning. And like I said, anybody that's feeling like I'm calling you out, I'm calling myself out. I've been guilty of literally everything we're talking about today, about not having the best relationship with a vet. I've complained about vet cost. I have, like I said, I am guilty of all of this. So I am in no way calling people out here and saying that you're not doing what you should, because I've been there.
That's right. And I only, went into vet school 5 years ago, and before that I was just another client, like I said before, and you don't know these things. Mm-hmm. And this is a good piece of advice I'd say is if if you're feeling judged or feeling like your vet looks down on you, maybe it's just a bad fit, and you need to find somebody who maybe gets a little bit more of your perspective, because when you come in and you don't understand these things, for my clients, hey man, you're not a vet, you're a mechanic, you're a farmer. It's not your job to know, but I do try to explain those things so you understand where I'm coming from too.
Yeah.
I'm not withholding medicine from your dog because I want my $50. There's a whole lot more that goes into it behind the curtain. So there's never for me as a vet, once I've explained these things and you still want to fight us about it, that's different. But if you're coming from just a base of not knowing and not realizing what goes into it on our end, I understand that, and let's work together to fill that knowledge gap. And now you know where I'm coming from as your vet, and I'll try to be as understanding as I can of where you're coming from too. Mm-hmm. We had talked about maybe some cost cutting and things you can do at home. So this would be a good segue to also talk about common thing that I see. I addressed some of it in the latest full cry article, but prescribing meds that maybe aren't designed for dogs and made for dogs. So maybe this would be a good place to talk about that, and I can transition into some of the at-home stuff. So one thing that's super common in the hound dog world, true dog world, is treating at home with lots of stuff, right?
Yes.
Classics like using Ivamex for cattle and giving that orally to dogs for heartworm prevention. Things like using, Bayer tree and shrub and cattle fly tag for fleas and ticks. Yep. Using horse dewormer to treat, hookworms and roundworms and intestinal parasites. that stuff. I mean, you can find all kinds of doses and recommendations and those kinds of things offline.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess another common complaint I hear or read is that oh, well, my old doc says this is fine to give to my dog for such and such issue, and I've been doing it this way for years and never had a problem. So that leads us into talking about on-label versus off-label medication use and prescribing.
Yes.
And so there's actually a law called Animal Medicinal Drug Use and Clarification Act, or MDUCA, and it basically outlines how veterinarians are allowed to prescribe medications, and gives you tiers of what you're allowed to prescribe and not prescribe. It's really important in food animal because there's a significant public health implication for using some of these drugs. You use the wrong drug in a cow, it stays in its meat, and somebody that meat, they can be poisoned or made ill from eating those things. So it's really important there, and a lot of that law focuses on that. But it also addresses what we'd call companion animal uses, pets, dogs, cats, stuff like that. Part of that law is that you, as a veterinarian, you are supposed to use the drug that has been labeled for a certain species, route, indication before you go and use the off-label thing.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to the heartworm drugs. Ivomec for cattle. Ivermectin, and that is an Ivomec, is the same ivermectin that's in the HeartGuard Plus. It's the same. That's the same ivermectin,
yep.
But HeartGuard Plus is labeled for use in dogs for the prevention of heartworm.
Yes.
Ivomec in cattle does not have that label on there.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you walk into my practice and say, can you give me a dose for Ivomec to use in my dog? Well, no, I can't. And the reason why is because I have labeled drugs that are made for the indication that you're using it for, heartworm prevention, and I'm legally obligated to use those drugs first.
Yeah.
What we're not discussing is whether it's actually effective or not.
Yeah.
So there's a lot.
We're discussing the legality of why you're not allowed to prescribe it.
Exactly. And I tell you what, I have done, hours of my own research trying to justify for you guys why you can use the Ivomec or you can use these other things, and it's not there, to be frank. But you have to wonder if all of these dogs get an Ivomec for years and not showing up heartworm positive if it's not working. That those dogs are just getting really lucky. But again, we're not talking about are these things actually working. We're just talking about why your vet has to prescribe the way they prescribe, and why that's changed. And so, yes, you're probably not going to walk in and get any more, recommendations for, just use the Ivomec, use, your Panicure horse dewormer for deworming. Those things aren't going to really be discussed anymore from a veterinarian's perspective because of those reasons.
Yep.
But there are things that you can do at home and that you can cut costs, and save you some money while also making us be able to work with you. I'd say we already kind of talked about it, but the first thing is, just keep up with your annual exam for $50. Even if all you do is walk in the door, I put my hands on your dog and, look at him and make sure I don't see any current illnesses. Just take off a physical exam. We can talk and ask, we talk about any current issues you're having, any health issues or concerns that they've had in the last year that you're worried about. It's up to you in part to take advantage of that time. So you can go in there and complain, it cost me $50 to walk in the door and they didn't, even do anything. Well, man, bring your list of questions. I don't mind that when you come in and you say, hey, what about this? What about this? I noticed this. Because you're paying me for that time.
Yep.
You scheduled it. And then, we are able to get on top of things that maybe you didn't notice all the time and catching issues that are able to be addressed sooner rather than later. And that ends up being better in the long run for that dog. I'd say, I hear heart murmurs that weren't there last year. I feel masses that weren't there last year.
Yep.
Dental disease that's kind of crept up on you. An underlying ear infection that you didn't even see the dog shaking his head. And so I do catch things quite often where the owner comes in and says there was no problem, and I find a problem.
Yep.
Now, if you're going to your vet and they're actually not touching your dog when you go in for your annual exam, again, maybe you just need to find a different spot. But I
Yep.
do put hands on from nose to tail every dog that comes in for an annual exam. So you might think that doesn't save you money by paying for an annual exam you don't think you need. But, if we can catch those problems early, a lot of them are going to be easier to treat in the early stages versus the later stages. And sometimes we can, prevent it from snowballing to a thousands of dollars issue,
Yep.
and keeping it a hundreds of dollars issue.
I will tell on myself, and this was years ago when I first got started. I had a dog that had a problem and it snowballed, and that dog unfortunately did not live because I didn't catch it in time. And maybe if I would have taken him to a vet regularly, it could have been caught. I mean, I'm not going to say it would have or wouldn't have. Who knows?
Sure. And, I always tell, whenever somebody brings up a story like that, I always say it's really easy. Hindsight's 20/20.
Yep.
And so you could have come in and maybe we caught it, but
Mhm.
all we're doing on our exam is seeing what we see that day. And so does this catch every possible thing that could have happened? No, of course not.
Mhm.
So, whether or not it would have made a difference in your case is always hard to say. But I can say with confidence that there are things that I catch.
Yeah.
And part of that too is, there's lots of guys maybe listening to this that might say, well, I've had dogs all my life. I know when there's a problem, when there's not a problem. I did some quick math trying to figure it out the other day. I see mixed animals. I don't see dogs every day,
Mhm.
but just in the last year, I figured I've probably put hands and done exams on, over 600 dogs. And that's a very conservative estimate.
Yeah.
And, even, unless you're a dog trader, you're probably not putting your hands on 600 dogs, maybe in your lifetime. And
Yep.
so, our training and our education enables us to pick up on things that you might not,
Mhm.
just out of doing it. And just the thing goes for me when I bring my car to the mechanic. Well, just because my front right tire is shaking, and the last time it was a wheel bearing, and I come in and say it's a wheel bearing to the mechanic, he laughs, right? Because
Mhm.
just because it's happened to me once in my life
Yep.
doesn't mean it's going to be what the problem is all the future times. And his knowledge and experience,
Yep.
he understands that and has seen all the things that could be causing that problem. So, you coming in and relying on that knowledge
Mhm.
and experience can get you far, but
Oh
it's not
yeah.
100% guaranteed. That's for sure.
And at the same point, but if you're not taking your dog to the vet annually, but how many of you are actually going to go out there with a stethoscope and examine your dog, know what you're looking for? You know what I mean? Like, yes, you look at your dog, you see your dog every day, but also what you don't notice is slow things that change incrementally and not drastically. So,
Mm,
and that's part of, like I said, where things crept up on me is because I didn't realize a gradual change. If you're not a trained vet, it's really hard to be objective when it's your own dog and you see that dog every day. And like I said, we're not examining it to the same extent as a vet would.
that's a great point. And even amongst the vets, we'll often have another vet examine our dog because of that bias right there.
Mm-hmm.
That slow onset of an issue that you may have kind of, is that normal? Well, yeah, I think so. And it
Mm-hmm.
just kind of slowly, day by day, changes. Versus, the dog that comes in and I make notes about an issue or not having an issue, and the next year, oh, was that there last year? I go back and check my notes. Nope, that's changed.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what you're describing. That makes a big difference for sure.
Like I said, that's just my own experience, and that's why I do see value in what you're saying, and because like I said, I've paid the price. Unfortunately, well, my dog is the one that really ended up paying the price because of my ignorance, and definitely don't want to go through that again. So that's why I was excited to have you on.
Well, yeah, we, including us, we learn from our mistakes, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you do want to go through something one time or treat a patient one way and it didn't work, and the best you can do is to not make that mistake again and change how you do it the next time. So
Mm-hmm.
happens to all of us.
Well, I think we were kind of segueing into the cost cutting.
That's right. So that we talked about, the importance of having that annual exam. We
Mm-hmm.
talked earlier about how that lets us prescribe in some cases, not all the time. If we've got that established relationship, maybe you don't have to come in on an emergency exam, which
Mm-hmm.
is usually going to be more expensive. to come and get meds for something if we feel like we kind of have a handle on your dog and their history and what's going on. And that does allow us to prescribe. So right there, you may be saving yourself an emergency visit in the future, which if you've ever had to go into an emergency veterinarian, is even more expensive than your general practice veterinarian.
Yeah.
And so that's a big cornerstone of it. But let's get a little bit more practical. Vaccines. Okay. So vaccines have been done by a lot of hound and tree dog guys by themselves because, there's rural background. Maybe you're vaccinating your cattle, stuff like that, how to give a shot. And you know what? I don't have a problem with it. There's a lot of practices in vets that, have an issue with that or kind of get hard on you for giving your dogs vaccines. And, these vaccines that you're given are mostly for your dog's protection. And so, if you want to give your own dogs your own vaccines and stuff, that's okay by me. And so you can save some money by doing that. Even if you just come in and get your annual exam and say, no, I don't want any vaccines, but maybe the rabies, we'll talk about that in a second. Yep. I do my own vaccines at home. Cool. Some things I would tell you about that. How the vaccines are handled and stored and shipped is very important. And, the common thing you'll hear from a vet to say, well, you don't know if that feed store vaccine has been handled and kept appropriately and whether it's been exposed to heat or sunlight or anything like that. I'd say that happens. I'm sure it does. The 16-year-old kid at Tractor Supply left it out on the dock too long and it thawed out, and then that vaccine is no longer effective. I'm sure it happens.
Yeah.
But I would say how often? Probably not that often.
Yeah.
But some things you can do to skip that problem. You can order them directly offline. They come straight from a manufacturer's warehouse, and they come on ice. And the important things for you is to maintain that vaccine however it's supposed to be maintained. And almost all of them are supposed to be kept at cold temperature until you're going to use it. Yep. So, get them from a reliable source, handle them how you're supposed to handle them. Don't pull up the vaccine, don't pull up 15 vaccines in your kitchen and then walk out on a 90-degree day and leave them sitting on your pickup dashboard while you go out to your kennels and vaccinate them. You'll inactivate your vaccine. It's no longer effective. But as long as you're doing proper handling, proper, keeping temps and making sure that you're getting from a reliable source, doing your own vaccines is a great way to save a little bit. Because go ahead.
Do you have a recommended source for vaccines? Like you said, places to buy them online?
Sure. I don't have one that I recommend per se. I would just say, buy from bigger name companies, and then buy vaccine brands that are, I guess I would say used by vets.
Okay.
Brands like Merck is primarily what we use in my vet hospital. Zoetis, Boehringer Ingelheim, BI for short. There's even a couple I'm missing, but those are brands that we buy and use. And so there's a couple, kind of feed store brands and stuff like that. I don't know that they're necessarily worse than these others, but I know for sure I can recommend these other brands because I've used them and they have good companies to back them up. So buying from a reputable manufacturer, and then check how these things are being handled from wherever you're ordering it. You make sure they're getting shipped on ice. If when you get it in and your ice pack is thawed out, well, you need to send them back and request your money back and order from somewhere different next time. But I would say, try to avoid the little niche sales and buy from big name companies that sell this stuff all the time and know how to handle them, ship them.
Okay.
So that's vaccines. And let's talk about the rabies vaccine real quick, because this is a common one I see, how it's a crock that only vets are allowed to give the rabies, or I guess give a legally recognized rabies.
Yeah.
So you can buy the rabies vaccine online. You can go walk to your feed store and buy the rabies vaccine and give it to your dog. It should be just as effective. The problem with rabies specifically is that it poses a really big hazard to human health. And so that's why rabies is looked at so much differently than your just temper parvo shot or your Lyme disease shot. And so because rabies in somebody who gets it is 100% fatal. If I say 100%, there's like 2 cases in the literature where people survived it. Okay, but for all practical purposes, it's 100% fatal. Still a huge cause of death. In other undeveloped countries where rabies is still running rampant in their dog and cat populations, and so the most states and local governments have much stricter requirements on your rabies vaccine because of those issues, and because there's a whole list of regulations and laws that we have to go through if you get bit by an animal that has questionable history or an unproven history of a rabies vaccine. And the reason that they rely on veterinarians to give those is because we have been trained how to properly handle, store, and they can reliably and repeatedly say that if a veterinarian gave it, that should have been a valid rabies vaccine. Yeah. Versus, if I hand a guy a syringe and needle and say, go give that dog a vaccine, and that's their first dog, do you honestly trust that they gave the vaccine the right route, that it got under the skin where it's supposed to go, that they didn't handle that vaccine improperly? If it's your kid that gets bit by the neighborhood dog, are you going to trust that they gave that rabies vaccine the right way because they got it from the feed store and they say they know how to do it? So those are some of the reasons why that rabies vaccine is a little bit more strict. But it's pretty dang cheap, and especially if you have somewhere that does rabies clinic. My clinic does a couple rabies clinics times a year, and they're usually like $5 to $8 a shot. Yeah, you're given by a veterinarian. You get your certificate. It's not a big deal. We get guys that come in, the truck full of bear dogs, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There you go. So you can still do that pretty dang cheap if you time it right, or you can just get it done at your annual. And if you have to pay for one shot, that's really not so bad. I think ours is $18 for the rabies shot. So that's the one, and that's the kind of the rationale for why that one's not an at-home vaccine. But everything else, just temper parvo, lepto, Lyme, Bordetella, things like that. You're giving it yourself, and if you can buddy up with if you got another guy that has some dogs, and you can buy, most of them come in cases of 25, and maybe your hunt club or something like that is able to buy them and do them together. That's the way you can save some cost too, is to buy them in bulk and get more of them. Yeah, and be able to do it like that. But that's a good way and that's something you can you safely do at home. And if you don't know how to give it, ask somebody who does. And shoot, even just ask to peek over your vet's shoulder when you're in there getting the rabies shot, how they're giving it. I would do that. I'd be happy to show you how you're supposed to do it. It's pretty simple once you see it done. Yeah. So.
No, that's something I've done for years, is give shots, and you're right. I mean, it saves a lot of money. And
deworming is another thing you can pretty easily do at home, and most everybody listening to this with hounds and curs probably already does. You can walk into pretty much any feed store or order it offline, and get these dewormers. When I'm talking about dewormers, what are we deworming for? Things like hookworms, roundworms, whipworms, tapeworms require a little bit different dewormer. But there's multiple forms of over-the-counter dewormers you can get. Stuff like Nemex, that's pyrantel. Multiple forms of fenbendazole. Safeguard would be or Panicure is the dog formulations of that. And so that's something you can buy and do yourself easily. The most important thing there is making sure you actually know your dog's weight, because it's really dependent. You don't want to underdose. Yep. And so make sure you got an accurate weight. But the Companion Animal Parasite Council, that's a big organizing body for parasitology and controlling these internal parasites. They recommend monthly, year-round, broad-spectrum parasite control. So deworming your dogs monthly can make a big difference there. And using something like Nemex or pyrantel is really cheap, especially even compared to fenbendazole. But on that note, we are starting to worry about parasite resistance to these drugs, because we do give them every month. Yeah. And maybe that's a topic for another time. But at this point in time, it's still recommended to deworm every dog on a monthly basis, or at least on a regular basis. And that's something easy enough. Most of them are made to be easy to give. They're flavored, or maybe the granules that you sprinkle on your dog's food. Yep. And so that's simple enough, and something you can easily handle at home. Don't have to pay a vet for.
Used all kinds of different over-the-counter dewormers through the years.
Yeah.
What I use now is a pyrantel, like liquid, like you said. Yeah. And it goes by weight.
Exactly. Yeah. Yellow, thick, looking stuff, and that's easy to get to. And now there's also lots of in ivermectin or moxidectin, one of these heartworm pills. A lot of those will also have a dewormer in it too. So like HeartGuard Plus has ivermectin and pyrantel in it. And so when you're giving your heartworm prevention for that month, you're also getting your intestinal parasite prevention in there. And so that's another way you can get it in your dog. But yeah, that's something that's easy enough to give, some dewormer, easy enough to do at home. Like I say, just make sure you get an accurate weight and keep up with it. So there's vaccines, deworming, and then the other thing that I was going to mention to you is just kind of knowing when to go and when to not go. When is it worth calling the vet and making a trip versus can I wait it out a little bit?
Yeah.
Going back to your beer scenario, we talked about how maybe if we catch problems earlier, they're cheaper. It's also when you have your valid VCPR, you're able to call in or text in or email in and to my clinic and to most clinics and ask about a problem. Hey, here's what happened. Hey, here's this cut. Hey, here's a video of my dog's coughing. Do I need to come in? Having that VCPR already established, we can do a lot with those. And so that can be a great first line option when you're just trying to decide whether or not you need to come in. And there's a stack of notes on my desk when I get in there every morning with those kind of questions and requests. Tips for those things is have as much detail as you can. If you're going to take a video or a picture, don't take it like you're a grandma with your cell phone, your flip phone, and it's all fuzzy and I can't see what's going on. Take a little time, get somebody to hold your dog, get it to sit still, take a good quality picture that's not fuzzy, good lighting, and I can do a whole lot more with a good picture than a bad picture.
Yeah.
But that is a really helpful way sometimes to say, I can wait, see if it goes away versus, you need to come in now. We need to take care of that. After that, maybe you're out in the woods, you don't have the ability to, you don't have cell service, you don't have the ability to call, things that are an immediate trip in. A lot of times your instinct will tell you if you've been, a lot of you guys have had dogs your whole life and you're like, this isn't a problem, it can wait. Obvious bleeding that you can't get to stop, breathing difficulty, staggering or having seizures, collapsing and being non-responsive. I mean, those are pretty obvious, right? Everybody's going to be like, oh, yep, vet trip time to go. How about the wound? Knowing when to bring in for that versus handling at home. Some general rules of thumb is if it's too deep for you to see the bottom of it and you're not sure how deep it goes, that's probably time to go for a vet trip. Especially, if your dog got grabbed by a bear, you got puncture wounds in the chest or the abdomen, probably better come in just to be safe.
Yep.
But versus the barbed wire cut, if the bleeding stopped and it looks relatively fresh, doesn't look like it's cut into the muscle, you can probably flush that out real good and wait on it. So, experience and being able to call for a little bit of backup just to make sure you cover yourself is helpful. But other things that, can kind of creep up on you that you might think you're okay to just wait on, but you really should, at least call in or shoot that text in is things like, weight loss. Now for you guys that are running your dogs hard, that's sometimes, kind of hard. Are they dropping weight because they're sick or because I just started amping up the running again because, training season's back in.
Yep.
So, if your dog's eating, it's got a good appetite and it's acting okay and it's got good energy levels, probably fine and they're just getting back to hunting weight. But, if there's something else going on, the appetite's a little off. They're not running as hard as they used to. That might be a sign that some weight loss is something to go get checked out. A cough that's persistent doesn't go away. Vomiting that is, hanging out for a while. It doesn't go away after a few episodes and the dog goes back to normal. Diarrhea that's seen to not go away and persist and maybe you feel like they're losing a lot of fluids. Those are not all things that you want to just wait and see how it goes because they can get bad fast.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of guys that might sit on that and wait. And I'd again urge you to say at least call in and ask, and they can help you sort out whether that's something worth coming in or not for. And then other things that they're probably not life threatening, but they're uncomfortable and they're painful for your dog. Hounds and ear infections. If anybody would have told me how many ear infections I was going to treat when I signed up to go to vet school, I would have been shocked, and I told you you're a liar. But we see them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've ever had an ear infection, but I've had an ear infection,
Yep.
and it hurts. Your ear hurts. Your kids, when they've got an ear infection, they're crying.
Yep.
Because it hurts to open their mouth and it hurts you. And your dogs, these hound dogs that come in, they're just tore up by a bear. And, I can still poke my finger in there and they don't say a word. They're tough. They're not showing it. They're hurting. Don't sit on an ear infection. Come get that cleaned up. Let's get some meds in there. And it's going to help your dog get back to feeling better. Treat them how you'd want to be treated.
Nope, that's something that I've had to deal with.
Yeah, and they're super frustrating sometimes, and some dogs deal with them chronically. But a lot of guys may not see that as a serious thing. And yeah, like I say, it's not life threatening,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a welfare issue and a comfort level and pain issue for your dog.
Yeah.
So don't sit on those forever. Dental issues, broke teeth, tooth root infections. Again, if you've ever had a bad tooth, man, that thing hurts, and your dog's feeling the same way. And it also affects their sensing ability. That's a bigger topic, but tooth root abscesses, those are the tooth roots are closely related with your dog's nose and their sensing ability.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not showing signs of not wanting to bite down on their food like they used to, or you get lucky enough to hear them chewing on a bone and they yelp when they're doing so. In the worst case scenario, seeing pus straying from their mouth, or seeing a lot of drool and stuff like that. Yeah, you say oof, and I've had some dogs come in and it's like, man, how did they wait this long? But sometimes it does creep up on you. So if you see things like that, dental issues, come get them taken care of sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things that you can wait on. A little bit of a limp, especially in an active dog that's been running and he's been hunting hard, and you put on 10 miles on the bear race. That dog, if he's a little bit footsore the next day, it's probably understandable.
Yeah.
Okay. So you probably don't need to rush in to get an X-ray, and most of you guys probably aren't. You can give them some rest and give them some time in the box or the dog house, and give them some time off of his feet. But I'd say a limp that's not resolving within a few days, or is either continually favoring one leg, or if there's an obvious that foot's not hanging right, those would be all reasons to come get it checked out.
Mm-hmm.
A couple episodes of vomiting after the dog has eaten some grass, and you see that in there, probably not a big deal if they go back to their food. And things like a little bit of a cough or some sneezing, a lot of those are short-lived. And you'll kind of see the general theme of these things is if it's not obvious that it's a come in or not sort of thing, a little bit of a waiting period is okay. Days or heaven forbid weeks is probably too long if that problem persists. And whenever there's a doubt, just call. If we've got to have ECPR, we're happy to help you sort out whether that's something worth coming in for or not.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot, and I think that will wrap it up for tonight. But I definitely want to have you come back on. I think you've got a ton of knowledge that we need. I think we could sit here for the next 5 hours and cover all kinds of stuff if we both had time. And
that's right. But yeah, absolutely happy to do it. And I love the three dogs. I've got one, and just like you guys, they're a big part of my life. And if we can help you, help a little bit of knowledge to help keep your dog healthy and hunting and keep you doing the sports you love, I'd love to do that. So I'd love to come back on anytime, and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Awesome. Well, everyone, be looking for your ads, or your articles are in Full Cry and American Cooner?
They're running in both. Yep,
okay.
For now. I admit you're going to miss one the next month. We had some family stuff going on, but yep, they'll be back in there the next month.
Okay.
And but yep, you can read them both. Full Cry and American Cooner.
That is Tree Dog Doc.
You got it. Yeah, that Tree Dog Doc on Facebook and Instagram. Started posting a little bit there, and we'll continue to do so if we get some good feedback. So,
Awesome.
give me a follow, and absolutely love to have you follow along.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
All right. Thank you. You too.
You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Tree Talking Media. And until next time, keep them talking in the timber.